maybe while we're waiting for a couple more minutes, we could chime in with a few questions that we had not scheduled to even talk about today. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about your companies while we're waiting for Rand to come in and what's going on, the latest and greatest?
Sure, go ahead. Chase, why don't you start?
So Authority Labs, I mean, basically we're a web-based rank checker. And so we go out and, you know, find out where people rank on Google, Yahoo, Bing for however many keywords they're interested in data on, and we do that every day and give them some nice tools to chart and graph and group and segment and report on that to clients and or, you know, if they're in-house to their bosses or CEOs or CMOs or whatever. And then we also have an API that lets people kind of do this, some of this stuff at scale, if they really want access to the raw data and kind of want to really want to process a lot of it. So that's the gist of what Authority Labs is right now, and we got some cool stuff on the horizon. But I'll let Mike talk about SpyFu a little bit. Sure.
I mean, I think a lot of the people that are on the webinar here are SpyFu customers. We have a rank checking service that's today we're here to talk about the Raven Tools thing, and a lot of people have been coming to us lately. Hey, do you guys have any rank checking? And I would like to just say that that Chase. At Authority Labs, these guys specialize in rank checking. They do the daily rank checking, and we have sort of a light version of actual rank checking. We do Google, Yahoo, and Bing on the PPC and the SEO side, but it's not the focus of our SEO offering. We have SpyFu recon files that are designed to sort of get to the dollar value of the opportunity, and a lot of customers that are probably Chase's customers and Raven Tools customers use recon files to help them sell their services. We try to capture the dollar value, especially at the point of the pre-sales and in the retention side. So I think that there's complementary things going on.
And maybe you and Chase chime in a little bit. You're sort of a gentle giant as far as your marketing is concerned, and Authority certainly in the industry, no pun intended on your name. But what kind of client base do you have, Chase? Could you tell the audience a little bit about that? What?
Yeah, I mean, it really varies. We serve small businesses. You can sign up for Authority Labs for anywhere from $49 to $99. To $450 a month straight through the site, but we have a number of Fortune 500 clients that use our data, use our interface, to track anywhere from 50,000 to 100,000 keywords, and our interface scales pretty well when you actually want to pull insights out of data on 50 to 100,000 keywords. And a lot of that comes from the tagging and grouping and segmenting ability. So it really varies, and then we also, through our API, have a lot of other software companies. We have kind of in-house people that have developed tools using our API that just use this data in-house for either clients or bosses. But then we also have other software companies that have wanted to integrate essentially ranking data into their software who use our API to do that at scale. Raven was one of those customers, and that's one of the reasons we were lucky enough to have them send their customers to us for a web-based kind of version of rank checking. And that was a really great partnership, and we're sad to see that end, but we kind of understand their decision on that for various reasons. I'm sure we'll get into that in this webinar, but yeah, I mean, that's one of the examples of kind of the other software companies that use our data.
So Chase, let's just go ahead and chime in with your opinions on the latest, you know, your reaction to what's happened with Raven Tools. They were a big customer of yours, I'm sure. A painful post that their CEO left. You know, what was your feeling on that when that happened? How did you? Was that like?
It was a little confusing at first, and you know, I mean, ultimately, it's just one more. You know, when you deal with anything Google, you know, just kind of another year of drama around certain things. I mean, they've been very confusing in terms of the messaging and actions, you know, from them around ranking data specifically. You know, at first it was, you know, you should just look at traffic and conversions, and then, you know, a year or two or however many, 2.5, whatever it was, they started giving people ranking data inside Google Webmaster Tools. How accurate that is, I don't know, but the fact that they're, you know, took the time to develop that and offer it within Google Webmaster Tools, you know, sends a very conflicting message to the industry. And now it's in Google Analytics kind of via Google Webmaster Tools. So, you know, and now what's the whole AdWords API thing? I mean, I'm not sure people are really clear on what exactly has happened with that. Essentially, Raven and other people in the industry, you know, who are using the Google AdWords API, you know, if you use the Google AdWords API, you get a yearly audit essentially from them. And, you know, if you're not complying in certain ways with their terms of service, then they have the right to revoke your API key. In their terms of service now is, you know, you're not allowed to offer scraped data either, you know, by doing it yourself or getting it from a third party. Basically, they don't want you to provide ranking data or any sort of scraped Google data alongside the data you get from the AdWords API. And so, you know, essentially everybody that was using the AdWords API, Google went to them and said, you know, you're using scraped data, you essentially have to pick, you know, do you want to continue to offer ranking data, or do you want to, you know, continue to offer the features that you're currently offering via the AdWords API? And in this case, you know, Raven chose the AdWords API.
Hello.
Hello?
Hey, it's Rand.
Oh, there we go.
Rand,
I'm so sorry, you guys.
No problem. I'm sure you haven't lost any fans, Rand.
I feel terrible. My apologies. Just took some time getting the hardware set up here.
No problem. Glad you could join us. It's a pleasure. So let's officially begin. And Chase, you were doing a really good job of summarizing things there, so I don't want to cut you off. Do you want to finish up that summary, or?
Yeah, I mean, basically Google gave, you know, everybody that was offering their whatever tools they're offering via the AdWords API and ranking data or, you know, scrape data from Google. Basically, they gave those people an ultimatum. You need to pick one. If you know, if you pick ranking data, we're going to pull your API key. So that was essentially it. And Raven chose to you know, to continue using the AdWords API, and I think it's from a overall move for them to try and kind of diversify some of their offerings for the long term. So I think that's really where they're trying to go, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing just in the act of doing it, or, you know, Google's not really trying to crack down. I mean, they're just saying this is just one way for them to kind of leverage some of the things that they're doing and control the industry, control the relationships a little bit more. So, you know, it is what it is. And, but, you know, it's data that people want and it's data that people need. So, you know, they're going to get it somehow.
Well said.
Hey, Rand.
Hey, gang.
How's it going?
It's going good. Yeah, yeah, Chase, I think you did a great job sort of giving a background and introduction to that. And I agree. I think that, is Raven's choice. The only thing I might add to that is I think that some of the messaging that you mentioned coming from Raven uh, would be messaging that I don't know that I would have taken away the same takeaways that they did. Um, and I obviously am not, in their offices, didn't get on the phone with the people from AdWords or from Google that they might have spoken to, but it definitely seemed like they took away a much stronger message than what we did or what any of the other folks did. So I got to talk to.
In terms of their message to them from Google, or to them in the industry in general.
Yeah, their message back to the rest of the industry, sort of saying like, hey, we think everyone's going to have to choose a side, and that Google's going to crack down on in different ways with different sorts of things. So, obviously, I mean, I sort of look at the other big players in the space. So HubSpot, right, which tracks Google rankings, which Google Ventures is an investor in HubSpot, and they're tracking data. They had their AdWords shut off, but they were sort of like, that's not as important. Let's keep rankings data. Or a Conductor, a Covario, a Bright Edge, all the big enterprise ones, like Ginzametrics, right? Matt Cutts himself is an investor in Ginzametrics, and they're still doing rank tracking. So doesn't seem quite as precipitous as what's being suggested.
Yeah, I mean, let me just throw in what we are actually hearing specifically from John Henshaw at Raven Tools, because we haven't actually gone into that yet. But basically, what he said is that SERP trackers are probably going to be out of business in 6 to 12 months because of that model. And that, quote, we really do believe that before the end of 2013, you're going to have to pick a side. You're either going to be in compliance and innovate your way out of this, or you're going to go just be defiant and go your own way. That, to me, strikes me as doomsday stuff.
And like I said, I mean, John may have been on the phone with different folks, from Google. He may have heard something different from what the rest of us heard. But I've been in touch with, CEOs from those other companies, not all of them, but some of those other companies, and they feel pretty good, that this is not something where Google's going to go be broad in the attack, but rather that this was a targeted thing just by the AdWords API TOS enforcement team, and it could. I have a suspicion. Like my personal guess is, AdWords' API folks went to the Google hardware team and basically said, "Hey, we need a lot more hardware. Like we want to ramp up a lot of the things we're doing. We want to provide a lot more data via API." And the Google hardware team basically said, "Hey, we've got a ton of people who need lots and lots of hardware and lots of disk cycles and bandwidth and all this stuff from us. You guys are going to have to take some of it from your existing bandwidth." And because they were bandwidth constrained, they went back to their team, sat down in a meeting. This is all speculation on my part, okay? So total opinion, just a guess based on what I know about Google, that they sat down as a team and said, "Hey, why don't we go through and just be really picky about the TOS violations, cut off everyone who's not super TOS compliant, so that we can get some more bandwidth back to do some of these other cool things we want to do in the next 6 months, 12 months. That way we won't have to ask hardware for as much as much of their stuff." And I think that's what happened. HubSpot got cut off. We got cut off. Raven Tools obviously got cut off. Who's the other ones? WordStream, a bunch of people, right? So that's
that's an interesting perspective. From my perspective, been sort of on the AdWords side quite a bit. We have a lot of AdWords clients, and I know personally a lot of the guys that do bid management, like run bid management companies. And for me, this has always sort of been the case. I've never been under the illusion that I could start a bid management company and have SpikeBoo. It seems to me that there's two cultures inside of Google. There's pretty much the one that we know and love, which is pretty much a research and development driven company lots of engineers, lots of, don't be evil stuff. And then on the other side, it's the money people. And there's like this whole AdWords team. And they're just kind of the business guys. And the guy that heads that whole unit is pretty much like, well, we're going to enforce contracts, because that's what businesses do.
Right.
And so I think that they actually always done this with the AdWords API. They've always been fairly like, you're going to use it the way we want you to use it. And I definitely get that impression talking, I'm talking to guys that are managing hundreds of millions of dollars in AdWords spend. And they get these same sort of random contacts. They don't have like a special point of contact at Google. It is, oh, you are in violation. We're going to shut off your entire, your entire account. This is just how they operate on that side. And when Raven just started doing bid management and WordStream bid management and like all these companies doing bid management, pretty much Google's not going to let you do bid management in particular, specifically bid management, but probably, they're going to apply their AdWords API TOS very strictly, and in my opinion, they always have.
Yeah, I think that's...
But because Raven's like an SEO tool, everyone thinks that they're shutting down scraping, but I don't see that.
I mean,
this is an API thing.
Yeah, so you guys have probably seen the same thing we saw, which was that about, between 18 and 24 months ago, the ability to get rankings data directly from Google became somewhat easier. It was like they blocked less IPs, they banned less of them, they weren't as aggressive.
So my feeling on that, I mean, honestly, like, and I really don't think they're trying that hard.
Nope.
Like with the, I think they, and I don't know what, for whatever reason, I mean, I think they like the fact that people scrape them. I think it improves their numbers certain ways. I think it, it keeps their data in front of other more people easier. I mean, Google's a really, really smart company.
As long as we're all focusing on their rankings, we're not focusing on how we're doing on Facebook or Bing or whatever other competitor X.
Mm-hmm. And, I think kind of deep down, I mean, I think they want people to be able to get this info and this data. I think that they can't just make it, as easy, like it's just super easy to get. I think they need to, just really for hardware purposes, they need to rate limit, obviously.
Yep.
But but they also at the same time can't officially offer anything, without a conflict of interest being there in terms of organics versus, or the organic side versus the paid side.
Well, I think the referral string is how they are doing it in a more whatever you want to call it, official fashion, right? So referral string via the URL parameters. The problem is keyword not provided is eating into all of that, and so
now there's that. So again, just more conflicting behavior and information from them. Really,
it's very complex. Absolutely, very, very complex. Well, I mean, the thing, my broad perspective on the subject is, I feel for Raven Tools. I'm very empathetic to them. I think if I were in their business, maybe I would have made the same decision, sort of having all the variables that they have in the business that we're in today, and given what our customers want and those kinds of things, we're not planning on making changes, and we're looking for substitutes for the AdWords data, not looking for substitutes for rankings data right now.
I agree with you. I'm actually extremely sympathetic. Had a bad feeling in my gut the entire day for them. It just seemed like that would be an easy decision to make. And quite honestly, I think that for them, it's probably a pretty smart decision, certainly calculated. I do think that they may have been basing it on, I mean, basically talking about what John was saying again. I mean, he was saying, let's see, the writing was on the wall. To us, the writing was on the wall. To us, it was strange that AdWords was being used to get us to remove something that was unrelated, and so we took that as a pretty good hint. He then said, all it takes is a copy and paste of the terms of service to enforce that across the board, and that's what's going to happen very soon. So it's an educated guess.
Yep.
Which sucks if you're making a decision about your business that you've built, over years, that you're kind of using hints and guesses. And the thing is that actually happens to even bigger companies. Everybody has to kind of make these guesses. I have sort of firsthand accounts of other people making these calls, and in your company, right? You guys had to make that choice.
I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, you guys got some letter, and what did that letter look like? Wasn't it pretty much just like, it wasn't like a personal letter? It's one of the letters like if you get like an ad shutdown on AdWords.
Right. No, it's just an
like
automated. I think it's exactly the same thing everybody got. I mean, I know I compared ours with some of the other. It was just an automated message. I mean, in the past we've had specific outreach where some individual person at Google on the search quality team has asked like, hey, can you stop doing this? Hey, we don't like this. And we've sort of been like, yeah, we can do that. Sure. So I think that's a very different type of conversation. That's not how this one went down.
There's a startup I know. They're fairly new. I'm completely blanking on their name right now, but they were doing some stuff with the AdWords API, completely legit, and they got shut off from it. And it turned out I got an email. They asked me, kind of if I had seen anything or heard anything or whatever, and I was like, yeah, I've heard some people, are kind of getting these same deals, and theirs was literally completely on accident. He emailed me like 3 weeks later. He's like, yeah, it was a mistake from the AdWords team, but and they completely shut off their API access, and they didn't have it for 3 weeks before they got turned back on it. And I thought that was kind of shocking that I mean their business was based on that the AdWords API, and it was shut off for 3 weeks until it got turned back on again.
Well, we've had ours turned off probably 3 or 4 times, and then it was always like, oh, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about that, and then they turn it back on.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to turn it back on this time, but that's not uncommon.
Right.
Yeah, I was reading on the Raven blog about the new AdWords API that just came out. This is sort of actually an upbeat email because they got, or an upbeat blog post because they had their AdWords API shut off or something, or they didn't have this functionality and they brought it back up. But the thing is that the AdWords API is sort of a side note. By the way, the new AdWords API provides volume data for exact keywords only, not broad or phrase.
Right.
It's a new API change across the board and applies to any developer. It's like, you'd almost expect that would be sort of, that those things would be consistent, right? It's like you sign up for the API and you're like, well, now I'm going to be able to base my business on this, but it's really not good. It hasn't been the case that API data has been like really consistent or better than anything else really ever, as far as I can tell. You guys think about that?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and you guys, I almost want to get out of your way, but at the same time, I just want to introduce the attendees actually who are pouring in with some questions, and we're going to get to those later. But in the interest of just going through, first of all, just maybe a super quick, fast introduction with who I am and why everybody's here, and more importantly, just a little bit of research that I wanted everybody to understand that went into the gathering of this group. It was really pretty remarkable. Mike came to me a little while ago and said, hey, this is a hot topic. We should jump on this. And I've done joint webinars with Mike for many years now, actually, and it's been great to chime in and talk about the hot topics. But I also reached out to some of the companies that you can see here, and most every CEO that I reached out to of all of these companies that are focused on SERP tracking reached back out to me, and you can actually take a look at the Idea Launch blog where I've tried to throw out some questions to all of them that I thought would be interesting that we've looked at together as a group here internally and got some really good answers. And what I think everyone should understand is the camaraderie around this particular topic and almost, protecting what's happening with the right to scrape Google for positions is really overwhelming. And I don't think this community would stand for that data to not be available. And nor do I think Google would ever shut that down. It's impossible to imagine that. So as we frame this, I think everybody by now understands the situation, but there are a lot of content marketing people from my group, a couple hundred on this webinar, and you should certainly hear the situation is, SERP tracking is a critical element basically to search engine optimization, and the complexity, of course, is scraping the search engines, does it violate any terms and conditions? That's question number one. Question number two, does it tarnish any data? When we're scraping Google for rental car in Boston, does that go into search volume? And are we tarnishing the very data that we're trying to get by feeding in that scrape? So that's the complexity that we all have to think about. And of course, there is a divide, compliance versus scraping, hence the fireside chat. So we talked about John Henshaw's thoughts last week. Mike read most of these quotes, and as Mike liked to frame all of this, is the sky falling when it comes to SERP? Do you guys want to chime in there? Is the sky falling? Are we going to see ramifications? Are we going to see other SERP providers, trackers get out of that business now as a result of this? What's your take on that?
This is Rand. I wouldn't be totally shocked to see a few other people potentially leave the field. Ahrefs obviously was one of the ones that did, but at the same time, I think we have a list that we maintain internally at Moz that our product team looks at of people offering, rank tracking data, and there's over 200 companies on that list right now. There's a good, 100 sort of Fortune 1000 companies who do it in-house themselves. Built their own trackers. Most of them are pretty quiet about that, but you can imagine some of the more obvious ones would be some of the very consumer-facing ones that, in the travel or e-commerce industries, like the giants in there all have their own internal software to track this stuff. I don't think they're turning it off. And I don't see, I could see Google getting more aggressive with this, but I think if they do that, they have to come up with another solution, because the businesses, and a lot of those businesses are Google customers.
And you're breaking up. Are you dialed in, or are you on the VoIP thing, or what's up? Can you hear us? That was breaking up for you, right, Byron?
Yes, I think he's not only breaking up, he's broke.
Okay.
Well, I'll just kind of continue with that, because I think, honestly, the people that do this, the software companies that do this, I think if you look at, those whatever ones were on Rand's spreadsheet, I think if you take the overall, I think that honestly, if you look at everything worldwide, we're actually probably a very small percentage of all that happens. They get automated queries from everywhere all the time. So,
the state of the industry is there's a lot of companies that are incorporated like offshore in third world countries, in countries that are sort of outside of, Google's legal reach. Honestly, it's kind of, it's straight up rare for a company like SpyFu. We're actually the only ones that are based in the U.S. Keyword Spy was based in Singapore / an offshore shell, and SEMrush is Russia, and my bad, iSpionage is actually based in San Jose. So legally, it's kind of tough to shut that down. You're not going to probably get rid of SERP tracking really ever. because people need to know this information, and they'll get it whatever way they have to, even if they go back in the day, you know, you just download something off of download.com, run it on your own machine, and you get the data that you wanted, which is not as powerful as the tools that we have available now, but it certainly accomplishes the very basic task that people need to report to their clients on you know, SERP ranking and stuff like that. So there's kind of no way it's going to go away, and I just don't see it in Google's legal best interest to start, you know, basically pursuing those things. Because Google, you know, does a lot of accesses a lot of websites very often, and if there's this precedent of I don't know, cease and desist, or like if they build a legal precedent around building out trespass channels and stuff like that, I don't think that's in their best interest in the long term strategically for search engines in general. I really think that they actually come down on the opposite side of that in pretty much every legal case that they ever get into, which I think is good. I think Google is actually a good company. I actually like them and admire them, and I don't think that they're doing evil things here. I actually think that they're just being in business, quite honestly, and trying to protect the core business that is, I mean, all of their money comes from Google AdWords, so you kind of expect them to be a little bit more litigious or contract-y around this certain set of data.
Well, they can't. They don't want scraping to stop in general, because that's all they do all day long.
No, SpyFu and, you know, Authority Labs and everybody that does this stuff ultimately drives revenue. If you can figure out what your competitors, which keywords your competitors are profitable on, ultimately you spend more money on AdWords. If you make more money in your SEO, you're more likely to start testing that stuff in AdWords. I think that ultimately we all feed into the value chain that is the $30 billion enterprise that makes up Google's, you know, AdWords.
I thought they're like 40 billion now. I don't even know.
Yeah, I've been saying it for a long time.
Let's dive to another question. Why don't you think Google or Bing is providing SERP tracking services? And the image you're seeing on the screen here is kind of interesting. Writer Access has a API into Getty Images, 9 million Getty Images that we're launching in January for $2 a pop too, which is pretty interesting.
Cool.
And if you do a search in Getty Images for Google, check out the results from like the first couple pages you get. SEO, look at all the keyword phrases of SEO. Why isn't Google or Bing providing SERP tracking service and having SEO providers pay for that?
I think, well, I mean, I was kind of hinting on it earlier. I mean, I think it's kind of the same thing you get when talk about newspapers, or I mean, it's editorial like editorial content versus like ads.
Totally agree.
On the web, you know, like paid content is that line is much more gray and much more broad, and it's really hard to it's much more difficult to distinguish on the web, you know, the paid stuff versus the organic stuff anywhere you look, whether it's an ad somewhere. I mean, and that becomes even more difficult when you talk about Google. And I just think that, you know, I mean, sometimes you see Google making moves or testing things where, you know, they're doing some stuff to push the organic stuff down, and but you know, I think it's a very fine line for them, and I think that officially offering really detailed data about how brands are exposed on the organic side of, you know, their search engine is just crossing the line for them, especially on the organic side, and especially when you look at competitive data. Like if you look at in Webmaster Tools, you know, they're giving you data around where you rank, how many impressions you're getting for a certain query, and your average rank for those impressions, but they won't give you data on your competitors. They won't give you that data on your competitors, and you know, there's a good reason for that. And I think they just, if they start giving people data, if they start giving people more and more data about the stuff, it'd be a slippery slope for them, I think, especially on the organic side. On the paid side, they can justify it all day long. I mean, they need people to spend money with them. They need advertisers to spend money with them. And so making that as easy as possible to do is in their investors' best interest. It's their business model. But on the organic side, they do everything they can to get webmasters to do stuff for them, to make it easy for them. And in terms of, the crawling stuff and RDF data, schema.org, things like that, they're getting webmasters to help structure data so that it's easier for Google to interpret. And, they just don't want to give people those kinds of tools. They don't want people to have easy access to those kinds of tools to manipulate the organic side. So there's always going to be like a Google organic versus people that are trying to optimize for that. But if you're really doing the job that you should be doing, you're trying to be the best resource on the web for whatever niche you're targeting. If you can do that, you can do it right. Google should want you to rank, and they should rank you if that's legitimately who you are and what you're doing. But at the same time, you should be able to track those efforts, right? So
we know Google's hungry for dollars. They've got a lot of growth plans in their and I'm sure in their portfolio and their vision. But if they know they're getting the data right from you, from both of you, right? And Rand, if he's back on the call. Rand, are you back?
Yep.
By the way,
I think I'm here.
Awesome.
So they know that people are getting the data. Why not just sell it? I still don't understand.
I mean, I'll give my brief 2 cents, which is I think that Google evaluates lots of business units, and they look at ones that can please Wall Street and their investors. They look at ones that can please their bottom line. Right now, they're probably most interested in the ones that can make the street happy, because they just have such a cash hoard that dollars for dollars' sake is just not a huge huge interest to them. And so I would guess that, if I were sitting in Larry and Sergey's office and I'm sort of analyzing this, I'd be like, well, you know what, in terms of strategic, I see a lot of potential criticism that could come to us from this, because it's a little bit like the New York Times saying, hey, we'll provide data on what all of our reporters are researching, and which stories we think we might publish and won't, and which ones we're putting on the front page and not, which is a little, pushing the line in terms of editorial versus PR focused stuff. So I can understand that, not wanting to do it because of that criticism. And I can also understand not wanting to do it because they might look and say, all right, you know what, maybe this maxes out at around, I don't know, $1 billion in revenue a year, or maybe even a tiny bit more, but it's completely, it could give our competitors an advantage because it gives them a way into Google's services in an automated way. You know what? This just doesn't make strategic sense compared to all the other places we could be investing. There's, if you're Google, there's a million places. There's probably 40 proposals on Larry's desk at any given quarter that are $10 billion plus businesses in 10 years. I don't know that selling SERP tracking data is one of them. That's my 2 cents.
Mike, you want to chime
I also
in
don't
on
think
that
that it's in the interest of, I've always taken the approach that I'd rather them not give API access to that data, just because I think that it's in particularly advertisers' best interest to have a third party actually tracking that stuff. You kind of want to validate and not just trust that Google is telling you the truth. And I actually think that that's in their economic best interest. I think it's that third-party validation, such that Google doesn't know how we're getting it, and doesn't give us specific access, and doesn't spoon feed us what they think that we want to hear.
These slides are killing me.
What's that?
The slides are killing me.
Well, good. That was the whole point of
man,
gathering before the holidays, right?
Oh, brother.
Here's the question. what's going to happen with SERP tracking in the next 12 months? What are your thoughts on that, guys?
So this is Rand. I would love to see Google get much more detailed about passing the refer string information, so a much higher percentage of queries being sent out include refer string information, and they give lots of detail. I don't know if we're going to see that.
Well, but they're pulling that away.
I know. So
I mean,
Chrome
getting
now,
worse.
And
Chrome now
iOS.
The search.
My God, I mean, iOS 6 provides no refer data. It doesn't even say it's from Google. It makes the traffic look like it's direct. So, you're just losing it left and right. However, I'd love to see that. I'd love to see Google get around that. I think they might try and fight Apple to get the refer data into the iOS 6 over the next 6 months. But if it were just me answering this, I'd say probably not very different at all. Probably really similar to what it does today.
In the next 12 months, no. I mean, it absolutely not. I think there's a lot. Marketers are jumping onto the term big data now. But it's true, there is a lot more data that is available to people to analyze and look at what's going on. If you look at what some of the analytics companies have been doing, including Google Analytics, and then you have like Kissmetrics and who's the other one? But a lot of these analytics companies are actually they're extending the funnel. So your site doesn't begin and end at the conversion, right? And your relationship with your customer doesn't begin and end at the visit and then the conversion. I mean, it really does start at, it starts even before the search. And so I think you're going to see a lot of people looking at much more of the funnel instead of just, page views and uniques and conversions. Some of these analytics companies, I mean, they're going into, okay, who are these people after, connecting the dots from the initial visit to the conversion to, okay, they're now a customer of ours. When do they come back? How often they come back? How much do they purchase? How much do they purchase over 2 years? Are they receiving our email newsletter? Are they clicking on that email newsletter? I mean, these companies are focusing on what people are doing after the conversion, and I think you see SERP data and where that plays in that. It's above that. It's after they first. It's right when they first search, probably after they first hear about you or after whatever, the very, very top of the funnel. It's kind of in the middle, and if you can get an understanding of really how your brand is being presented within that search vertical, you can understand why that traffic is actually behaving the way that it is in terms of the page views, in terms of the uniques, in terms of the search terms, in terms of the actual conversions. Because that matters. How you're represented in that channel before they get to your site absolutely affects their likelihood to buy something from you.
Couldn't agree more. It's essential data.
Yeah, and so I think what you're going to see in overall, as far as what marketers are looking at and what kind of data they're looking at, I think they're actually, Google's been feeding everybody in terms of ranking data. They've been feeding everybody this bullshit around, you need to look at traffic and conversions. You need to look at traffic and rankings don't matter. You need to look at traffic and conversions. And I don't think anybody that was serious bought that. But I think that, now that you're starting to see a lot more data points come out around the site, not on the site, but around the site in terms of Twitter and mentions on Twitter. How does that stuff affect your traffic and conversions and the likelihood of somebody to actually convert from Twitter as a channel? It absolutely affects it, and people are looking at that data, and people are saying that data is valid, and it's the exact same thing as looking at where you rank on Google for a certain search term. And so, I think you're just going to get a lot more people looking at a lot more of the funnel, that begins way before they even search for you, and it ends way after they first convert with you. if it even necessarily ends at all. So, I think that's really where things are going, is just, trying to get an understanding of using all this data that we have now and all these tools that we have now to really get an understanding of, the full life cycle of, your potential customer to your customer to, when your customer ultimately leaves you, if they ever do, that sort of thing.
I think that's super smart. I mean, that's the future of marketing analytics and marketing big data.
There's a diverse. Yeah, we've got a ton of questions coming in, but I just want to have one quick follow-up to this question. What's going to happen with SERP? What's everyone's take on local versus universal? And Sergey, by the way, who I spent about 3 hours with on the phone yesterday from Keyword Search Rankings, is betting the farm on local. So I just wanted your take on that and whether you see that as a major play moving forward for SERP tracking.
Boy, I don't think it matters at all. I mean, it's not like I would go and buy a local search company and try and integrate it with our software. That'd be crazy. No, yeah, I mean, obviously, with the acquisition of
Rand just did that, for those of you who don't know.
With the acquisition of GetListed, we're huge believers in local and the importance of local. I think the only interesting thing that I might add is I think it will continue to be a different market than what web-focused and broad search-focused companies do. I think the who and the what is different for local than it is for sort of classic web search.
Got it.
Yeah, I would. I agree with that. I think that it tends to. It's a different customer that's only focused on that local market, and for those particular customers, it's actually a pretty easy decision. It's like, oh well, I want to rank in Scottsdale Dentist, and that makes a lot of sense from that perspective. From the perspective of like trying to rank on across the board terms and knowing that you rank, number 9 in let's say Sacramento versus number 15 in Phoenix is, well, I mean, at SpyFu we focus pretty much all of what we do on trying to give you actions, and I'm not 100% sure what the action is because there could be a lot of different actions in that, given that data.
I want to get to some. There's just a couple more questions, and a couple of them are really important. Any quick Dear Santa list you'd like to see changes in the SEO industry in the next year or two?
More of us. I want to see more of us. I love SEOs, man. No, and seriously, I think there needs to be more dissemination of the knowledge that the expert level folks have in the SEO field, and I'd love to see that disseminated further and wider, because I think it means that when that knowledge gets disseminated, there's less fear, there's less of this crap that you see like in the Smashing Magazine article about what an SEO is or isn't and how terrible they are. There's more of an understanding of what the field's about and what experts do and what you should expect. There's less ability for some of the snake oil salesmen who make the rest of us look bad to pull something over on unsuspecting clients. I would love to see those things.
Nathan had a good comment from Rank Ranger. A true competitor to Google. Do you think we'll see that in the next few years?
Nope.
No.
I mean, Bing's a pretty true competitor in a sense. I don't know what you want other than that. They're at least at 20% or something. They're a number 2, but there's not going to be a.
I think it's really hard to innovate within search these days. I mean, there's very few things you can do to improve search results as good as Google. As good. There's nothing that nobody's going to come out and like, oh, this is the way we should do it now, and all of a sudden you get these amazing results with 0 spam, and it's difficult.
Yeah.
So Raven customers need SERP tracking and performance reports and probably a lot of other things. Can you, one by one, sort of go through what onboarding plan you folks have? Chase, can we start with you?
Well, we have a thing going with SpyFu. Right,
yeah,
Mark?
that's true.
Maybe you would both like to talk about
promo
that?
code. What is it, 25% off the first year?
Yeah, let me find that.
We love Spy Fu is the promo code.
Yeah,
right.
all spelled out.
And now, did that all to all the guests? We'll send that out via email.
Yeah, we'll
but
send
just
it out.
maybe can you explain a little bit, particularly about how are you handling the onboarding effort? You know, with back data, for example. Can you guys talk about that? Because we actually have quite a few questions about that as well. And Randy, of course,
well, you can give us Raven's. You can give us your API keys from Raven, and there's instructions to do that on our blog, authoritylabs.com/blog. And we'll handhold you through essentially the process of importing your domains and keywords. First and foremost, if you're a Raven customer, you need to make sure that you actually use their CSV exports. I'm not sure. I've asked, and I haven't gotten an answer. I'm not sure if their API for pulling out historical data is going to be up after January 2nd. I'm not even sure if you're going to be able to get to use their CSV exports for that after January 2nd. It seems as though their messaging seems as though you won't. So get in there as soon as you can and make sure you get everything out into a CSV. And there's instructions on their blog on how to do that. And then once you have that, you can import stuff, the domains and keywords. So basically, automated account setup for us with their API key, as long as that's available. And then we'll import your historical data via their CSV bundle. You get a big zip file. And it's just, you just dump that to us and we'll unzip it and, basically take all the different files that are in there and build up historical data for you. And if their API does go away for that January 2nd, then you'll be able to do all the automated domain and keyword creation via their CSVs too. So
I wanted to offer one update that I noticed that wasn't in the blog, and it is in the site if you go to Raven and are looking to export. Originally in the blog it said that you had to sort of do, for each account or for each domain, you had to export that domain, and that's the only way that you could export your history. And it looks like now they've actually added the ability to export your entire account, and that's new. And they may have actually updated their blog, but the original post was you have to export in multiple different CSVs, particularly if you have a big account. But yeah, you can now do it in one big chunk.
Yeah. So we'll help you work through that, and just make sure to get in touch with us. There's also a form on our site to give us API keys and all that. So if anybody has any questions from us, you can always email support@authoritylabs, and we're here to help.
Rand?
Yeah, so I mean, we offer this functionality, but we don't have any sort of an import function from Raven right now. You can upload keywords and that sort of stuff, but we don't take back data. So I'd probably urge anyone who is moving over from Raven specifically for rank data to go with go with Chase and Mike and use their solution. I think that's a good one.
Great.
So ours, we allow people to import all of their back data. We do it on a concierge level, so you can send us whatever you have, whatever you download via CSV. We'll figure out a way to get it in. Basically, we're also offering we're actually offering, just because everything seemed so dire in the very beginning, we put together this package that was 3 months free of SpyFu plus Recon, which is, quite honestly, we've never offered even a free trial of SpyFu, but we were like, well, it's Christmas, and all these people are getting shanked by this whole situation, so we wanted to put together something that seemed pretty cool. So you can actually get SpyFu and SpyFu Recon and all this SERP tracking stuff through us for basically for free for 3 months. And just hit us up on live chat, or actually, if you sign up, we end up contacting you via email and asking you if you need some historical data imported. We kind of do a white glove onboarding process there. which is seemed like the right thing to do. Seemed good.
Let's get to some important questions. Is Rand using an IBM Model M keyboard? That thing is loud.
It's a Dell. It's in our, yeah, this is the computer that sits in like our webinar quiet room, so it's kind of old.
Hey Byron, want to switch to show my screen so we can see
each
other's, see our faces? We don't have Rand on the Hangout, but at least we.
Oh, sorry guys.
It's all good.
Sheesh, Rand.
Yeah, I know. So behind.
So there's me and Chase. We're actually in the same.
There we go.
The same room. I don't know if you.
Fine state of Arizona.
We actually aren't the same company. We just happen to live in the same city and are friends, so worked out that way.
Cool.
So what are the questions?
Okay. So
we're going to have to make these quick. I apologize, guys. Maybe like, 1-2 word answers because I have to run it in just a few minutes.
No
Sorry.
problem.
Gotcha.
Mike and Chase can continue on and answer some questions.
Okay, great. Excellent.
Okay, let's see here.
Let's ask any that Rand can answer then.
Yeah.
There was a question about, let's see. Somebody had a question about challenging everybody on the whole AdWords issue, just so you know. How would their cash cow AdWords not be able to get more hardware bandwidth on demand?
You would be shocked. My understanding from talking to lots of people at Google and lots of departments, including friends of mine who work sort of with and inside the AdWords team, is that, or the advertising teams, is that hardware constraints are a massive problem at Google. And the only team that really gets unlimited hardware right now is Search and Google+. And everybody else is still constrained, and they have to fight for budget and for bandwidth. It's yeah, it's one of their big advantages, but it's still a fight despite all that they've got.
Well, it's also one of their biggest costs probably too, right? So it's like you still have to manage that.
Yeah.
Someone noted the problem is building on rented land. Not sure what the reference is there. Anybody want to
Are you
pick that
talking
up?
about API keys or scraping?
I'm not sure what Peter had in mind. Maybe he can repost it. Can you see a time where there will be a scraper? Can you see a time where there will be a scraper certification where companies would be given a specific access that allows them to grab the data without tarnishing, skewing the keyword traffic data?
I want to answer this. There are, I mean, that would be great.
Great question, by the way.
And I will say this, that there are people that claim that they have this access, but I don't think that that's the case.
Yeah, Mike,
I've heard specifically that there are people that say that they have a custom API for SERP data, and I'm talking big SEO firms and tool companies, and I hear this from like very high. Everybody's real sketched out about saying who they are and stuff like that. But and I don't want to call anybody out.
I can do that.
Have any?
Go for it, Rand.
Have you heard about that at all?
Yeah, I know. I mean, there's a few companies. So, there's a good company out on the East Coast. It's like a startup that does like name tracking. They do SERP like ranking stuff. They use the Google Custom Search API, which you can use. Any of us can use. We looked into it. We would love to use it. Unfortunately, rank tracking is against that product's terms of service specifically. So, for example, like Bruce Clay Tools uses the Google Custom Search API. They have documentation around using it. But as far as I know, unless they have some special deal with Google that's not part of the public terms, they're violating that product's terms of service, and so could be turned off at any time. When we looked into it, what we were told is, no, keep rank tracking.
So you mentioned who I heard.
Yes.
And the point of I think the purpose of that product is really to build your own search engine with a limited results set. And so with that product, you identify, what kind of sites you want to be included in results, and so with maybe like a personal data tracker, you only want to include Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. And that's why it's probably against their terms of service, because it's not the purpose of the product.
Yeah, but I
So,
think I have seen, exactly what you're talking about, where there's like this, what you said, Mike, where companies in the SEO space claim, oh, well, we have a relationship with Google. We're doing this through an API. That's almost always through the Google Custom Search API. I've never seen anyone who's not doing it that way, but that is a violation of TOS. And when we looked into it, it was not something that they would provide for that. So it's possible, Bruce Clay might have a long ago agreement with Google to be able to use this for some sort of rankings data, and maybe they've kept that up. But certainly new companies can't get onto that.
I've heard this is the case. I've heard that with ad tracking companies also, and
Yep.
I'm very certain that that actually
Yeah,
is not the case.
it's definitely TOS violating according to what they say, and they can shut you off for it. And I know they do shut people off for it. So.
Mhm.
Someone asks, what about the shrinking percentage of screen space between, I'm sorry, what about the shrinking percentage of screen space above the fold to SEO versus paid?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a war that we have to fight against. But this is why I would urge anyone who's doing SEO to make sure you don't just have a head of the demand curve strategy. If you are in SEO, you've got to have a long tail, chunky middle strategy too, because it's just there's just too much of the clicks in the head of the demand curve are being lost. I think Google wants a lot of that, not just real estate, but they want a lot of those clicks for themselves. If you look at what they're doing with autos, with airfares, with travel, like they're taking up a lot of that themselves. With movie times, with instant answers to sports scores, news stories, all that stuff. They're kind of eating up that real estate. So I'd urge you to go into the chunky middle and the long tail if you're in SEO.
Peter got back to us with his rented land comment. He's referring to both API keys and scraping depend on a service that can be taken away from you, rented land.
Yeah, well, so I would argue, and I think that the other folks on the call would probably argue, that rank tracking data would be extremely hard to take away. It's at least as secure a data source as most anything that most technology companies operate with today.
Mm-hmm.
But Rand,
there's arguments to where it's actually more secure than an actual API key. I mean, if you look at Twitter in their stream,
sure,
their full Firehose API, I think there's only 3 to 5 people that have access to that anymore, and there was
2.
There's only 2 now.
Yep, just GNIP and DataSift.
Who?
GNIP and DataSift.
GNIP and DataSift. I wonder who UberView gets it. It's from.
You have to buy from one of those 2. Yeah.
From one of those 2. So I mean, Twitter had that allocated, allotted to lots. I mean, at least 25 to 50 people. And then in the last 6 months, they've literally pulled all those API keys. People browsers actually submitted an injunction to Twitter because they tried to take the API key away, and they're now suing Twitter over the fact that Twitter took their API key away. And I mean, it's a pretty dramatic deal over there, and they're screwing a lot of people. So I mean, I would argue that scraping is actually more reliable than
scraping. You have due process, right? Like you get a cease and desist letter, and you in essence have the legal system to help you decide whether or not you want to do that. If you have an API agreement, then it's a one-sided. These API agreements are one-sided, right? It's like you either pass Google's subjective audit, or you fail it and you build your company on it, and then one day they decide that you fail, then they immediately shut you off and just shut down your entire business. Scraping, you have time, at least.
You can leave the country, right, Mike?
Well, you can at least sell your company to somebody outside the country.
I was going to say, if you're talking about the legal side, so there are I'm sure many of you have seen like lots of terms of service on other websites that say if you display this website anywhere else, it must be at the top of the page, and that's specifically saying, Google, if you want to crawl my site and honor my terms of service, you have to show me at the top of the results for every search query. So Google is violating hundreds of websites' terms of service all the time. Violating a company's terms of service on the web is not a legal action. That is, I mean, that's one of the reasons why SEO Moz, which, we have a lawyer as our COO, and we obviously have attorneys who review things. We have investors who put a lot of money into the company. And so that, there was a lot of process to say, hey, is anything you're doing against, oh, okay, well, what if Google changes their TOS to say that this is violating and da-da-da? Okay, TOS violation is not a legal issue. Therefore, this is not a litigation concern. It's merely a data access concern.
And it's definitely not in Google. I mean, Google, like I said, is sort of from their intellectual property, arguments. It's definitely not in their best interest to.
Oh no! I mean, what they would want, if this case ever went to court, they would want it to be thrown out and say anyone can go scrape anything on the web because that's how Google's business operates. That's how they make.
Any truth to the rumor that Google Places is going to go with paid positionings for up to 3 spots?
I'd never heard that rumor, but I mean, I believe Google Shopping is now paid inclusion, period. So, and the local stuff is the long tail for Google. I mean, local businesses, there's hundreds of thousands of those. And if they all spend a few $100 a month, that's a lot of money, millions even. So,
sounds plausible to me, but I've never heard of it.
Ever heard of Google Places? Huh?
Does anybody have any additional theories on the Ahrefs thing? We know that Ahrefs, that Majestic put on their blog, hey, Ahrefs is doing this. They sort of called them out a little bit, well, kind of a lot because it's a direct competitor. And then the very next day, Ahrefs said, well, we won't have any keyword data, any scrape data on our site. We're out of that business. We're sketched out. My theory that I put forth was that
you guys, I'm sorry,
Rush and Ahrefs are the same. Does anyone have any other theories?
That could very well be possible. I've never met or known anyone who knows anyone who's at Ahrefs, being wise. But I apologize, you guys. I actually have to run. I have a one-on-one with one of my big data engineers, and this was great. I'm sorry I was gone for those 10 minutes at the beginning and then 5 minutes in the middle there. Thank you so much for having me and for hosting this. And thanks to all the people who came too.
Thanks a lot, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan.
Sorry.
And have a great holiday. My gosh.
Yes. Happy holiday to you.
All right.
If you need any king shots, Rand, just let me know for your family.
Oh, you're very, very kind. If I need bad photoshopping on top of images, I'll also call you.
Perfect.
Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Take it easy. I mean, Chase, do you want to throw in your 2 cents or anything on that?
No, I mean, I think their products are very similar, and I think that they could be the same company. I think that I highly doubt that Ahrefs even had an API key. I think they were just trying to capitalize on the trend of the time, and most of the people who use Ahrefs is for link data. So I think they're like, we're completely focused on link data. We don't even want to be involved in this. So we're just going to make it less confusing for people, and maybe get a little traffic at the same time and call it a day. I think that's what it was.
Chase, question for you: Does Authority Labs replace the rank checker that Raven is losing?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Is there any
and we do more than what theirs did also. So.
You guys do daily. Is there anything else other than the fact that you guys run daily instead of? I think then they are doing weekly. Is there anything?
Yeah, they're doing weekly. So we do daily. All the same engines are supported, and we have some more robust features around grouping and tagging. I think our interface is a little bit better. Graphing capabilities, I think, are a little bit better. Comparing data from today versus a week ago, a month ago, 3 months ago, beginning of time sort of thing is pretty important for people in comparing where they were today versus, where they started. So yeah, I mean, it's more robust, and there's more data in there, but it's still straightforward enough, I think, that if you're using Raven's rank tracker, then the transition should be fairly easy.
Is there any plan to integrate PPC and SEO data in these tools? Kent asked that question. I'm not sure which tools he's referring to, but
so SpyFu, if you're talking about like SERP trackings, we do SERP tracking for SEO and PPC, and of course everything that we have has pretty much cost per click data, cost per day, search volume. We even have, I think, click-through rate. Anything that you can get, through the AdWords interface, we pretty much include. Chase, you guys have search volume and CPC?
No, we have a volume metric that we get from WordStream. We're actually working on it. We'll have AdWords search volume stuff fairly soon. But in terms of, I mean, I'd like to ask that guy what ultimately the end goal. I mean, is it just for his own analysis? I think a lot of people use various tools for various reasons, whether it's analysis or whether it's generating reports for others to see, whether it's a client or, a boss or a coworker or whatever. So in terms of integrating other data into these tools, what is the end goal, I guess? Because that kind of affects all that.
Any comments or insights to share about advancedwebranking.com? I don't know anything about them. Does anyone?
Well, they're a desktop tool, and we're both web-based. So, it's, some people prefer a desktop tool. Some people prefer a web-based tool. I think at this point, that's really the major difference.
I've seen some people making recommendations that you use AWR for smaller clients and something SaaS-based for larger clients. That's just trolling around on like SEO book and stuff like that. That's sort of my my take on how to differentiate them. But I mean, obviously, yeah, advanced web ranking is a desktop tool.
Cool. Well, I think we've gone through the questions quite a bit here, and feel like we're at a good ending point.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you guys for being on, and thank all the guests for being on today's presentation.
Thanks for hosting it, man.
Thank you guys.
Yeah, this was fun. We should do it, 2 or 3 times a week, but we probably don't have time to. But you can tell there's a real thirst out there to understand what's happening in the industry, and this was really an eye-opener, I think, for a lot of people to understand the complexities.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Yes. Thanks.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Until next month and the next webinar Mike and I pull off together. We'll look forward to tuning in with everyone again. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you another time, I'm sure. Thanks.
All right. Later.
Thanks, guys.